You see, the Federal Reserve and other central banks are at an inflection point. They're really in a situation where they're between a rock and a hard place, and they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. Because for years, they were able to kick the can down the road by creating inflation and sweeping the problem under the rug. But now that inflation has become the problem, they can't solve the inflation problem by creating more inflation, because the solution to every problem has been inflation. The economy's weak. Print money. Lower interest rates. Companies are failing. Let's bail them out. How do we pay for that? Print money. Create inflation. So inflation has been kind of the one-trick pony. It's been a cure-all. Whatever ails us, just inflation is going to be the cure. Well, now that inflation is the disease, where's the cure? There is none. Any more stimulus, and we end up with an overdose. And that is where we are right now. And what's keeping everything going? The reason that we haven't already seen a collapse in the bond market or a collapse in the value of the US dollar, the reason we've had a rally in the dollar is because the world still has faith in the Federal Reserve. The world still believes that the Federal Reserve is serious about bringing inflation back down to 2% and that it has the ability to bring inflation back down. But it doesn't. Remember, it was the Federal Reserve back in 2008 that said not to worry about the subprime market. It was contained. Of course, we saw how contained that was. But even before the subprime problems, they told us there were no problems. They said there wasn't a real estate bubble. And they said even if the real estate prices went down, it wouldn't hurt the economy because it was so strong. So the Fed has a very bad track record. And more recently, with respect to inflation, first the Federal Reserve said we didn't have enough inflation. Then when inflation got to 2%, they said, oh, well, we need to have it a little bit higher than 2% to make up for all the years that it was a little bit below 2%. And then when it got much higher than 2%, they said, don't worry about it. It's transitory. It's all going to go away on its own. And they said that for a year as inflation got worse and worse and worse until they finally admitted that it wasn't transitory. And so now they're claiming that they're going to solve the problem. But that's another lie. It's just like the transitory lie. They knew inflation wasn't transitory. So why didn't they admit it? Because they couldn't fight it. Because they knew that fighting inflation would crash the house of cards that was built on a foundation of inflation. Everything the Federal Reserve has done has been to artificially prop up an overly leveraged economy. Well, the minute they try to fight inflation, they knock out those props and everything comes collapsing down. That's why they pretended it was transitory, because they didn't have the guts to do something about it. It was only when the problem became such a big political hot potato and everybody was worried about inflation that the Federal Reserve finally said, okay, we're going to do something about reining in inflation, but they don't have the ability to actually live up to those commitments. Now, they can pretend and they can hope that inflation just goes back down to 2% all by itself because they're talking about how committed they are to bringing it down, but they can't do it without creating a financial crisis. In fact, the rate hikes that they've already delivered, even if there's nothing else behind it, will create a financial crisis. It's just a question of how much time. It already happened in the UK, or would have happened, and we're very close to that point now. But also, inflation is going to keep getting worse. Remember, as inflation was getting higher and higher in 2021, and then again in 2022, they kept saying peak inflation. Every time we had a little downtick in the headline inflation rate, they were like, okay, it's over. Inflation has peaked. And then you'd see another new high in inflation. And so right now, people think, okay, we're going to get a little bit of a reduction from the numbers we had. That's probably true. I mean, you always get some type of ebb and flow. I mean, nothing goes in a straight line. So maybe the 8.5% year-over-year inflation will go back down to 7% or 6%. But then the next thing you know, it'll be 10% or 11%. It's not going back down to 2%. And at some point, investors around the world are going to realize that once again, the Fed is wrong and that inflation is never going to go away. Inflation is here forever. And that's when the bottom drops out of the U.S. Treasury market, because right now the yield on a 30-year U.S. Treasury is still well below 4%, even though the inflation rate is double that. And that's at 30 years. Why would somebody want to lend the U.S. government money for 30 years at 3.7% when inflation is already 8%? It's only because they believe it won't stay at 8% for long. They think it's going back down to 2% and it's going to remain there for most of the next 30 years. That's not going to happen. The fact that we had 2% inflation in the last decade, that's the aberration. That's never happening again. We're going to have massive inflation because governments are committed to massive deficit spending. They've taken on so much debt. The United States has a $31 trillion debt right now, and it's already impossible to pay that debt.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I intend, how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.